Stop scrolling right now and listen to me very carefully because I don't know how long this video will stay up before the authorities or something worse take it down. I am not posting this for clout, and I don't care if you believe me. I just need to create a digital footprint of what happened in the Blackwood Pines yesterday. If you see a man standing in the tree line near your property who looks like he's vibrating, lock your doors and do not look him in the eyes. It started as a simple range test for my new quadcopter, a high-end model I'd spent 3 months saving for, specifically designed for long-range transmission in dense environments. I drove out to the edge of the state reserve, a place where the cellular signal dies and the trees grow so thick they choke out the sunlight even at noon. I parked my sedan on the gravel shoulder, the only car for miles, and felt that familiar thrill of isolation that every drone pilot loves. I set the drone down on the hood of my car, the plastic casing cool against the humid afternoon air, and calibrated the GPS compass while the rotors chirped their startup sequence. The screen on my controller flickered to life, showing the crisp 4K feed of the gravel road and the looming wall of pine trees ahead. I pushed the throttle up, and the machine hummed into the sky, a mechanical hornet vanishing into the gray, overcast sky. For the first 20 minutes, it was pure serenity, the kind of smooth flying that makes you feel like a bird, gliding over the canopy that looked like a dark green ocean rippling in the wind. I pushed the range, watching the distance counter tick up 1 mile, 2 miles, drifting deeper into the sectors of the forest that no hiker had touched in decades. The feed was perfect, the transmission lag non-existent, until I crossed the ridgeline that separates the tourist trails from the deep hollows. The screen glitched, a tier of digital static ripping horizontally across the view, followed by a sharp warning beep from the controller indicating strong magnetic interference. I frowned, tapping the screen, assuming it was just the density of the rock formations below. The gimbal camera jerked downward on its own. I swear on my life I didn't touch it, but the camera snapped strictly to a 90-degree angle, tacked straight down into a small clearing. That's when I saw him, a solitary figure standing in the center of a patch of dead brown grass, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to lean away from him. From 400 feet in the air, he should have been a speck, indistinguishable from a stump or a rock, but the contrast of his pale skin against the dark earth was violent. He was wearing a suit, a dark, ill-fitting charcoal suit that looked wet, like he had just walked out of a lake, despite being miles from water. My thumbs hovered over the sticks, my breath hitching in my throat as I tried to make sense of a businessman standing motionless in the middle of a wilderness dead zone. I instinctively lowered the altitude, dropping the drone to 200 feet to get a clearer look, assuming maybe it was a lost hiker or a confused local. The drone whined as it descended, the noise of the propellers distinct and loud in the silence of the forest, usually enough to make anyone look up. He didn't move a muscle, his arms stiff by his sides, his head bowed slightly as if he were studying the dirt at his feet. I hovered there for 10 seconds, watching the feed, waiting for him to react to the buzzing mechanical intruder hovering above his head. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck, a primal instinct telling me that I was invading a space I wasn't welcome in, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I dropped lower, 100 feet now. The 4K camera capturing the texture of his suit, the mud splattered up the trouser legs, and the strange, unnatural stillness of his posture. It wasn't the stillness of someone resting, 'twas the stillness of a statue, absolute and rigid, as if he wasn't breathing or his heart wasn't beating. Thin, without moving his body, without shifting his shoulders or lifting his head, he did something that made my blood turn to ice water. He rotated his head perfectly backward, a movement that should have snapped his neck, looking directly up at the drone lens with a speed that blurred on the screen. He wasn't looking at the sky. He was looking at me, through the camera, through the transmission signal, right into my eyes on the controller's screen. His face was a blur of digital artifacts at first, but as the autofocus adjusted, the features sharpened into a nightmare I still see when I blink. His eyes were wide, too wide, lacking eyelids, just two perfectly round white orbs with pinpricked pupils that were dilated to the point of insanity. His mouth was open in a perfect O, not a scream, but a look of mock surprise, frozen and exaggerated like a theater mask. He stood there, staring up at a drone 400 feet in the air, locking onto a lens no bigger than a marble. Panic seized me, my fingers slipping on the plastic control sticks as I jammed the throttle forward, desperate to pull the machine up and away from that horrific gaze. The drone responded sluggishly, the motors groaning as if something was pulling it down, a heavy, invisible tether anchoring it to the clearing. On the screen, the man didn't move his body, but his head tracked the drone's ascent with mechanical precision, his neck twisting further than anatomy should allow. I slammed the return to home button, the emergency protocol that should have engaged the GPS autopilot and brought the drone back to my location at max speed. The screen flashed RTH engaged, but the drone didn't move, spinning slowly in a circle, giving me a panoramic view of the clearing. And then, the man raised his right hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed a pale, elongated finger directly at the camera. The video feed cut to black, not static, but a solid, heavy blackness, as if someone had placed a hand over the lens. The telemetry data froze: altitude, distance, battery life fall, the numbers stuck in place, dead on the screen. I stood there on the side of the road, the controller dead in my hands, silence of the woods suddenly deafening, feeling exposed and incredibly small. I waited for 5 minutes, scanning the sky, hoping to hear the familiar buzz of the returning drone, praying that the signal loss was just a glitch. But the sky remained empty, the gray clouds rolling over the ridge like a suffocating blanket, and the feeling of being watched began to crawl up my spine. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that I had to go get it, not because of the money, but because the footage on that SD card was evidence of something wrong. I grabbed my backpack and the tire iron from my trunk, a stupid, inadequate weapon against whatever was out there, and started trekking into the tree line. The GPS on my phone showed the last known coordinates of the drone, about 2 miles in, across terrain that was steep and treacherous. Every snap of a twig under my boot sounded like a gunshot, and every rustle of the wind in the leaves made me spin around, heart hammering against my ribs. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became, the bird calls fading away until the only sound was the harsh rasp of my own breathing. The air grew colder, a damp chill that seeped through my jacket, smelling of wet earth and something metallic, like old copper pennies. I checked the coordinates constantly, watching the blue dot on my phone inch closer to the red pin that marked the drone's grave. When I finally broke through the dense underbrush into the clearing, the first thing I noticed was the smell, a thick, cloying stench of ozone and rotting meat. The clearing was exactly as it had looked on the screen, a circle of dead grass surrounded by the oppressive wall of pines. In the center, where the man had been standing, there was nothing but trampled dirt, mashed down in a perfect circle, as if a heavy weight had been spinning there. My drone was lying face down in the grass about 20 feet away. The propellers snapped, the plastic casing cracked open like an eggshell. I ran over to it, scooping it up, my hands shaking as I checked the camera gimbal, which was twisted at an unnatural angle. The SD card was still in the slot, thank God, and I yanked it out, shoving it into my pocket as if it were a diamond. I didn't stick around to investigate the footprints. I turned and ran, sprinting back through the woods with a reckless speed that nearly broke my ankles. I didn't look back, not once, even though I could feel the weight of eyes on my back, a heavy, physical pressure between my shoulder blades. I scrambled up the final ridge, bursting onto the gravel road and practically throwing myself into the driver's seat of my car. I locked the doors, my chest heaving, and jammed the key into the ignition, peeling away from the curb with a spray of gravel. I didn't stop driving until I was back in the city, surrounded by streetlights and people and the comforting noise of civilization. But the fear didn't leave me. It just changed shape, settling into a cold knot in the pit of my stomach as I sat in my apartment, staring at the SD card on my desk. It took me 3 hours to work up the courage to plug it into my computer, my hand hovering over the mouse, terrified of what I might see. When I finally opened the file, the footage was there, crisp and clear, playing back the serene flight over the canopy. I fast-forwarded, my heart rate climbing as the timeline approached the glitch, the moment the world went wrong. The video cut to the clearing, the camera jerking down, and there he was, the man in the suit, the pale statue in the woods. I paused the video, zooming in on his face, looking for pixels, for a mask, for anything that would prove this was a prank. But the resolution was too high. I could see the pores on his skin, the wet slickness of his hair, the absolute emptiness of those wide eyes. I played the video frame by frame, watching the moment he looked up, the impossible speed of his neck snapping back. But then I noticed something I had missed in the live feed, something that made me push my chair back from the desk in horror. As the camera descended, in the periphery of the shot, in the shadows of the tree line behind him, there were others. They were barely visible, just pale blurs in the darkness of the forest, but they were there, dozens of them. They were all wearing the same dark suits, all standing perfectly still, forming a loose circle around the clearing, watching the man, or maybe watching me, just brightness, trying to clear up the shadows, and realize they weren't just standing. They were floating slightly, their feet hovering inches above the pine needles. I felt bile rise in my throat as I watched the man raise his hand to point at the camera, realizing now that he wasn't pointing at the drone. He was pointing past the lens, past the technology, pointing directly at the person who would eventually watch the footage. He was pointing at me, in my room, hours later, bridging the gap between his reality and mine. Then came the part of the video that I hadn't seen, the part after the signal cut out but the camera kept recording. The screen didn't go black because he covered the lens. It went black because the drone was snatched out of the air. The audio, which had been just the roar of the propellers, changed to a wet, squelching sound, followed by a voice. It wasn't a human voice. It sounded like a radio tuning between stations, a chaotic mix of static and tones that formed words. Found ... you ... double quotes, it rasped, the audio peaking and distorting, scratching against my speakers. Then the camera was turned, the lens looking out from a different angle, moving rapidly through the woods at ground level. He had taken the drone, and he was running, moving with a terrifying, fluid speed through the dense trees, the camera shaking violently. He wasn't running away from the clearing. He was running toward the road, toward where my car had been parked. The footage showed flashes of the gravel road, the spot where I had been standing, empty now because I had already hiked in. And then, silence, absolute and heavy, until I heard my own heavy breathing on the recording as I ran up to the drone. I watched myself on the screen, my face pale and sweaty, snatching the drone up and running away. Someone had been standing right behind me when I picked up the drone, just out of my peripheral vision, watching me take the bait. I sat there in my apartment, the silence of the room pressing in on me, realizing that I hadn't escaped anything. I had been allowed to leave. I had been allowed to bring the footage home, to bring the virus of their existence into the world. I heard a sound then, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the window of my living room, which faces the fire escape. I live on the 4th floor, too high for anyone to reach without a ladder. But the tapping was distinct. Tap, dot dot dot, tap, dot dot tap. Slow, deliberate, like a finger against the glass. I didn't want to look. I wanted to crawl under my bed and hide, but the pull of the horror was too strong. I walked slowly into the living room, the lights off, the street lamp outside casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. The tapping stopped as I approached the window, the silence returning, heavy and expectant. I reached out and pulled the curtain back, just an inch, peering out into the night, praying to see a bird or a branch. But there was nothing there, just the empty metal grate of the fire escape and the brick wall of the adjacent building. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, laughing nervously at my own paranoia, turning back to the room. That's when I saw the reflection in the television screen that sits opposite the window, its bill in the black glass of the TV. Behind my own reflection, there was a face pressing against the window I had just looked through. It's what him, the man from the woods, his white eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, his mouth open in that same silent O. He wasn't on the fire escape. He was clinging to the sheer brick wall like an insect, defying gravity, waiting for me to open the glass. I screamed, stumbling back, tripping over the coffee table and crashing to the floor, scrambling backward into the kitchen. When I looked back at the window, he was gone, but the glass was vibrating, a low hum that rattled the pane in its frame. I grabbed a knife from the counter, a useless gesture, and locked myself in the bathroom, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The operator told me police were on the way, but her voice sounded distant, garbled, like she was speaking through a bad connection. And then the line went dead, the familiar digital static from the drone feed tearing through the speaker of my phone. Found ... double quotes, the voice rasped from the phone, from the hallway, from inside the walls of my apartment. I am sitting in the bathroom now, the door locked, the lights on, typing this out on my laptop, because I need you to know. The police haven't come, or if they did, they never made it to my door. I can hear footsteps in the living room, heavy, wet footsteps that sound like mud squelching on hardwood. They are slow, deliberate, moving closer to the bathroom door, pausing, then moving again. I can see the shadow under the door, blocking the light from the hallway, standing there, waiting. The doorknob is turning, slowly, rattling against the lock, twisting with a force that is bending the metal. I'm going to upload this now, before the internet cuts out, before he breaks the door down. If you watched the video, if you saw his face, if you saw the eyes, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that by watching him, you invite him in, that the signal acts as a bridge. Look away from your windows. Don't look at the reflections in your screens. He travels through the signal, through the feed, through the very thing you are looking at right now. The doorknob has stopped moving. The shadow under the door is gone. Wait, there is a tapping on the bathroom mirror. Behind me, I'm not going to turn around. I can see his hand on my shoulder in the reflection of the laptop screen. His fingers are long, pale, and covered in black soil. Don't watch the rest of the video. Delete this file. Forget you ever read this. He is smiling now. I can feel his breath on my neck. It's cold. It's over.